Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who feeds on the light of truth, yet starves on the shadows of lies.
Tim Longo.
There were so many good things I could pull quotes from this time. I kept jotting them down while I was playing.
Yeah, it is some thick... I don't remember if this was off air or on air, but we were talking about Lovecraft, and you were mentioning sort of like, you know, his
language. Yeah,
his language is very, very verbose and just unnecessarily thick, and and they definitely have taken full.
Yeah, they've leaned in.
Yeah,
I also considered a puerile meandering of sentience, a puppet in the hands of the ancients, but. Yeah, and that was only half of that one. There was like two more things anyway.
Yeah, it just becomes to the point. Like, I think I give them credit. We're talking about Eternal Darkness, of course, for those who are for some reason just joining us. And I give them credit for achieving that tone, and that because the writing for what it is, I think is pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad.
And they achieve the pulpish kind of feeling. So I give them credit for that. But so much of it is just nonsensical and hard to really
and weird
utilize for any sort of like plot purposes. You know. Yeah. But I mean that's why you're coming to this game. You know, that's the whole kind of.
Yeah, that's the end, right? You're expecting some Edgar Allan Poe or definitely, obviously, the Lovecraft, and I mean, setting it in Providence as they do. I looked that up, by the way, and he was in fact born there and did die there. So
that's where it's great. Yeah, there's a comic book that I don't know if I want to recommend because it's Alan Moore.
Well, there you go.
It's very recent. It's called Providence, and it is a maxi series. I think it's maybe 12 issues, and it came out very slowly. Like sometimes it felt like once a year, so it took a long time. I know it was faster than that, but it felt like that. And anyway, it's all kind of about it's about this reporter that is sort of investigating cosmic horror-ish stuff. It's a long story. There's other supporting comics that relate to it, but Lovecraft is in it, and it's called Providence, obviously, because he goes to Providence and blah, blah, blah. But it is some whacked out stuff. I'm a little worried about Alan Moore these days, but
I've been a little worried about him for a while.
yeah. I don't know if
did he do the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen? He did like a Black Dossier version of that was out there. Okay, but back to the game at hand.
Yes, Eternal Darkness.
Yes, Eternal Darkness. I think the thing we should probably start with is the structure, and then we can maybe talk a little bit about the individual stories. We kind of touched on it a little bit the first time, but at this point we're into the structure, which is find a page, maneuver Alex around the house, find a page of the book, read the page, and then enter the mind or a story or what have you of. Actually, I mean, it's not even clear necessarily if they're all related.
I think some are and some are not. Yeah,
I think some are not, because I think Elia or whatever, the dancer, probably is not, and Karim probably is not. Though in this section we had also a French monk, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know if he was a monk. Yeah, I mean, he could have been.
And or at least somebody in a
messenger
in a French monastery.
Yeah.
Whether or not he was a monk, I guess, is a question. Anthony and also what was her progenitor's name there? Not Aaron Roivas. Maximilian. Yeah. So I kind of wonder if Anthony is an ancestor too, because he's in France and.
Yeah,
Maximilian's. Well, it could be. Anyway,
they might all be. I mean, very distantly, you know. I don't remember. I think I did know that at one point. I should have looked it up. But yeah, and the thing that I'm loving about the structure and forgot how much they embraced it is really the return to Alex.
Right.
In the sense that it's essentially sort of hub and spoke in a way, even though it's still linear in the number of the which pages you get when, but there's this hub feel to the mansion, and this concept of coming back to her as she's in this hub, and it's not dangerous in the hub for her yet. Spoiler, and then, but you're gaining abilities and knowledge about the house and about the magic and about the story over time. So every time you come back to the hub, she has more options, right?
Right.
More, or at least another key to unlock another door, etc. And so she's peeling this onion of the mansion off, and it makes you really. It makes I think we probably talked about this with it. Resident Evil. It makes the mansion a character, Yeah. And I love that sort of cyclical nature of coming back to her time and time again.
I particularly like the idea that just through these experiences and reading, she's actually gaining these abilities, whether it's the magic to repair a key, so that now, I mean, there's a lot of just clever hiding of the fact that this is all just linear and written out, and there's probably some statement about fate in and of itself, but she's getting an ability that you sort of could see as being general purpose, but it's really just to do the one thing to get you to the next place. So it's like, I'm going to be able to reveal something. I'm going to be able to dispel something. I'll be able to repair something, etc. Now I can enchant a weapon, so I can use that as a key, right? I mean, it's just a thing after thing. And
they're very clever with teaching you about that stuff in the previous chapter, right? About like, I can enchant weapons. Oh, that's right. There's this hole in the mansion where I can put a weapon.
Right.
So and they're always...
so they bleed through both sort of like the skills that she gains, but also just kind of this player knowledge. So you feel that kinship with her as well, because you're gaining knowledge about what to do in sort of the same way she's gaining knowledge about what to do, in a different but very parallel way. So it's super, super interesting.
Yeah, you're projected into her in a way too, in that meta sense. Yeah, which is really cool. That agency is closer with her because you're learning with her, which is, it's always a good. I think we've talked about this before, but that's generally a good goal with games, is to try to have the character and the player learning together.
Right.
So there isn't this feeling that the character has knowledge the player doesn't have. That's where that cognitive dissonance usually happens, where you can't really you don't really understand as easily because the character's acting like they're smarter than you, and you want to try to avoid that if you can.
Right.
The other good example I thought was, there's the sword example, but then the revealing the invisible door for Maximilian that had, the triangle on it, and then kind of dawning on you when you get back to the mansion, oh yeah, the dresser had that same symbol, but the keyhole's not there. So it's, they've taught you something like that in a very clever way, but not the exact way. It's not like there was a dresser in Maximilian's time. It was something else, but it was enough of an information to put two and two together. So,
spoilers. I didn't get that far.
Wait, what?
I finished Maximilian, then I saved, and I was done.
Oh, right. Sorry. Sorry, I did. I just spoiled it.
That's fine. I'm sure I would have figured that out.
I've been, so I guess we didn't talk about exactly where, because for whatever reason, once we finish the page, I stop when I get the next page, but I don't start the next page.
Oh, okay.
I should stop doing that.
That's fine.
Stop.
It doesn't. I don't think it matters.
Yeah. Well,
it's not enough.
Just revealed the next puzzle to you.
Well, that's fine.
So you had the dresser key. You would have figured it out.
I'm sure I would have figured it out. I'm not concerned.
Yeah. But yeah, the structure is definitely one of my one of the things I remember about playing originally that I really liked.
It also feels like the insanity meter bleeds through to Alex. Like that she is left in a state similar. I mean, it might be just that it's eating away at her sanity. It's not really clear to me, but I felt like at the end of Anthony's, maybe Karim's, I forget which, that she was pretty low on her sanity meter, and she was having a lot of effects. Like she's been having more and more effects as she reads the book. Like there's the knocking on the door. that you can't do anything about. There's a phone call at one point. There's also that great moment in the bathtub. I had an insanity effect where the game ended. It said coming soon, Eternal Darkness 2, Sanity's something else. I can't remember. Revenge, I don't know. Whatever. I don't remember what it was exactly. Continues. Right, yeah.
And I think they do some clever coding with it too, or scripting where oftentimes those are placed really well. So it's like you just finished a thing and then that one in particular comes up. It was sort of a natural stopping point. So there's a moment where you're like, wait a second, did I just finish this game? It's just enough. And for instance, too, I'd be interested. I bet it's fairly scripted as well. The upside down rooms. Have you gotten any of those?
I've not yet. I've not gotten an upside down room.
I've gotten a few of those, and it seems to me that they're probably only specific rooms that they do that with. That they've scripted it to be able to be, because you'd have to create collision for that room and have it be a sort of a separate level and do all this. So I'm sure it's not.
It has to work. Yeah.
So I'm kind of.
I did get the one where Maximilian goes down a ladder and he's in the prison that he ends in. I don't know if you got that one. Yeah.
Yep,
so I think some of them are deliberately scripted. To just be basically part of the story. I mean, you also got this, game over one. The other ones I got a lot of like flies and stuff like that were on the screen, or moving around and, chasing after Alex or somebody.
Did you get the, I don't know if I want to spoil it or not.
It's fine. I mean, I've played this before. I've seen a lot of them.
The Hamlet one? Have you ever gotten that one?
The which one?
What? You'd know what I'm.
One more time. Hamlet. No,
the play, the Shakespeare.
Yeah, no, I have not gotten that one.
Okay, I'll just leave that one
either. Okay, that one's good. That sounds good.
I don't think I got that one the first playthrough because I would have remembered it obviously for me being a theater person. And I just got it this last session and it blew me away. I was like, what? And so I mean. The other additional point with the insanity stuff is there's a lot of work in these things. Like this is one of those features we talk about from time to time. I feel like, especially in this era and especially today, where it is really hard to convince people to put the time into this stuff.
Right.
It's the first kind of stuff that gets cut. It takes a lot of effort. They actually have way more of them. I haven't looked at a list yet. I'm trying to not spoil it for myself. But I've gotten some this time that I've never seen before. They have way more than I thought they would. And we were talking about this over lunch, me and some friends when we started playing the game, and I heard the number 150 thrown around. What?
Yeah.
Holy cow! Yeah.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
I mean, if you're going to play the game, 4 times, right? I could see them getting a little stale.
Right.
So maybe that's what it takes. I mean, Warren Spector said, in defense of Deus Ex and trying to, prevent these sorts of things from being cut, is like, yeah, sure, only 10% of people are going to see that, this one thing that you made, but collectively, everyone will have seen everything. Not in any individual, but as a collection, everybody will have, the whole thing. Yeah. And that's what's going to make it special, right? And that's what's going to set it apart. And that was his defense for, yes, of course, if you play the stealth, I'm going to crawl through every duct, you're going to have a different playthrough than if you're going as the heavy or whatever, where you're going to break through walls and things like that. You're just going to have different experiences. You're going to not see everything that the game has.
Right.
And I think there was a time where we would have said there's replay value in that. As I get older and I'm less likely to replay stuff, except of course for hosting a podcast where every week I spend hours replaying stuff. If not for that, there probably wouldn't be a ton of replay in my life. So I sort of get that, but I also feel like it's okay if I don't see everything. Like
it would. Yeah, it's okay, and it's also the point. I mean, it's the point of the medium, and I feel like at least people these days understand the concept more. It's hard. It's not as hard to describe to. There's still sometimes the budgetary question about it, but generally, I feel like I've been met with, when this conversation comes up, I've been met with an understanding, right? And if something is cut, it is really just sort of, it's time to ship it kind of conversation, not necessarily I don't agree or that this is a bad idea, but it's just more of like, hey, we just got to ship this thing or whatever. So yeah, I mean, the understanding's there. And I think Warren's quote is a good, I mean, essentially it's the metric that it was being measured by was in the old days was incorrect. It wasn't that everybody needed to see everything. It was just that the work you put into it needs to be valuable to somebody.
Right.
Some percentage. And even if it's a small percentage, that value, because of the medium, it should be high, and but this is a great example. This particular sub feature is a great example of that. Because it's not like an open world game or something like that, where it's like the players choosing to kind of explore and see if they can see everything. This is
right. And the point is to have as much content as you could possibly shove into the thing, right? That's the point.
Right.
In some open world games, having worked on some that are like that, that's kind of like the point, right? Is it's a maximal game design rather than a minimal game design. It's not meant to be efficient like we sometimes talk about. But here it is meant to be efficient in a sense, right? It's not doing anything. There's not a lot of sort of mechanical difference or anything like that. I mean, you might be just playing the same mechanics and then something weird happens. You might even have a combat where you explode in the middle of it or something like that. And then it's like, oh, I didn't really go into that room. I think I had something like that happen, where my body just like segmented in half. And I was like, oh, I didn't. And then it restarted. I was like, oh, of course. Right. I didn't realize my sanity was so low. So there's that too. So yeah, it's not inefficient in that sense, right? In a design sense, but it is inefficient in a development sense, right? So that's a distinction we don't often make, because often that efficiency correlates, right? An efficiency, like, oh, all the mechanics all boil down to one thing, like we talked with Breath of the Wild or Shadow of the Colossus with that sort of fatigue meter. It all boils down to one thing. There's the one resource. It's all super efficient, right? And there's not a lot of extra development, right, to support multiple different sorts of things and different UI elements or whatever. Here it is actually tons of extra development work. It sort of reminds me of being on Starfighter, and there was a point where I had a couple of days set aside to just do when ships blow up, what happens effects, and just sent email to the team saying, okay, what happens when we blow up a ship that, currently it's an explosion. What else can we do? And people sent ideas, and like 5 of them made it in. Right. But this is like, months of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just a different scale.
The whole team was involved. Yeah. And some of them are, real-time 3D related. Some of them are audio. Some of them are 2D screens that need to be made. Voiceover work, right? So it impacts, many of them impact script. So this had to be something that was fully embraced by the whole team, really. And I'm sure the whole team was, probably has memories of everybody on the team implementing one of these.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So it was, I'm trying to look through some of my favorites that I got this time. There was the Hamlet one for sure. Oh, the other point that I wanted to make, because the way, I think I mentioned it last episode, but I'm playing with with an empty insanity meter. So I'm fully insane pretty much, 95% of the time. And I'll describe
and in the game.
Okay. Yes, that's very good. Am I really doing this right now? Are we recording? Who's this madman on the other end? And I'll describe how I can't do on 100% of the time for certain purposes, because of just finishing the game, if I want to finish the game at all. But when you play with it basically empty the whole time or most of your time, when you get to below a certain threshold, as you probably have noticed, the audio tracks start changing. So you have basically the screaming and moaning and voices that are just underpinning everything you're doing basically nonstop. And then when your meter goes up, I think it's probably around 2/3 or something, then that turns off and you're back to sort of just regular ambient quiet. Well, mine mine is on the whole time. There's people screaming and moaning and like yelling, and chains are rattling. I don't know what's going on.
Life with a writer, man. Life with a writer.
Yeah, kind of. So at this point I feel like I am going insane because this audio track is nonstop and I'm literally going crazy with this. So I'm trying not to turn the volume down, and music volume or whatever. So I just fully commit to my choice, but it's when it never turns off, it is rough.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Just audio. And that isn't an event. Yeah. That's not like some of the ones we mentioned where it's like triggered by a thing and then it's event and then it has a beginning, middle, and end, and then it's over. This is just playing and it's just looping.
Just all the time. It's always underneath. Yeah.
So that's another sort of version.
The disc I have is a little scratched up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so actually when I get to low sanity and that moaning is happening all the time, that is one of the tracks that doesn't it skips and it causes, and I've been streaming it causes my Elgato to drop some frames, like just like reset itself and be like, oh, I'm video only now, or like I don't know what it's doing. There's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, so it's weird. Well, it's fine.
Used game.
Used game problems. Yeah, no, I expected to have some kind of problem, so I'm not at all surprised. But I did clean it several times. What's that?
Maybe it's an insanity effect.
Nice try.
We just keep saying that every episode.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I'm gonna take sections of it and just like play it backwards in post.
Right.
So people will be like, what did I just hear? What?
So you're playing sort of normally, right?
I'm mostly playing I'm playing it kind of straight ahead at this point. And it's not because of that. But just in general, I'm trying to play it like I would have played it. And it's a good contrast to you as well, because I'm not getting as many of them. And that does actually highlight which ones that feel deliberately placed at particular points in the story, like Maximilian's or Alex's with the tub, or the reboot or the sequel one or whatever. Those feel like, I'm not sure I would have noticed that those were the same if I had lots of them to talk about. So,
well, here's one interesting thing that occurred to me that, because I think I played my first playthrough, I played fairly insane as well, just to see, because I wanted to see as many of them as I could. One thing that I didn't think of at the time, though, that's occurring to me now playing through, regardless of the sort of stuck point that I got to that we talked about pre-show that I'll talk about in a second, the value of enemies changes when you don't care about your insanity meter. Because there's no other resource purpose for them so far, unless you're getting like a rune out of one of them. And so if you don't need to do finishing blows, like I really just sort of avoid enemies. Like I don't need
you just run them around or run around them or whatever, like a Resident Evil for that matter.
Yeah, because you take the hit when you see them, so your insanity goes down, right? And then if your insanity is empty, it trickles down into your health. So that's really the rub for me now. And so when I see enemies, my health actually gets hit because I'm out of insanity. So it's basically insanity meter is just an additional health meter in certain ways. But because mine's always empty, I just take the hit, heal myself if I can, and then I don't have to kill them because I'm not going to need the finishing blow. So it's sort of adding this extra weird decision making to me, and so I'm kind of and generally they're pretty slow, so you pretty much can avoid most of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize. I guess there's probably a death that I had where I didn't quite understand what had happened, and it must have been my insanity was already all the way down, and I actually took the final blow through my insanity.
Yeah, especially the big guys. The big guys take a lot of insanity. So when you see them, and so if you're empty, and you're low on health, they could drain your health.
Okay. Yeah, that's been what's been happening to me. Since we're talking about your low health, let's talk about your particular problem in Karim, because this is a hallway that also was tough for me. And I actually had a few charges left in my health necklace, and I had the spell. So why don't you take people through that, and then maybe we'll talk about the individual 3 stories that we played this time, just kind of in general terms, and their kind of arcs.
Yeah, it's this is yeah. So let me unpack this. Well, then the irony of what I was just saying, as far as like skipping enemies, this particular room that we're talking about, or hallway, is one of those times where you can't. Right, you can't progress. It's a blood lock, so you can't progress until because a force field is put up, and you have to kill all of them before you can progress. So I couldn't really do my usual shenanigans. So it was a perfect storm of I'm playing the way I'm playing with no insanity resource. B, I only am keeping 3 saves and rotating through them, so I couldn't restart the level to get back more health. C, I was low on health at that point, maybe a quarter of my health for that full fight. And I'm not good at dealing with those big guys. So I could basically get through to the last big guy untouched, but a couple swipes from him and I'm down. D, I don't remember if I'm using numbers or letters. D, because I chose the green old god and the way, and I kind of unearthed this. I understand it better now because this happened to me because I did a little research. And I just didn't put 2 and 2 together in my first playthrough. The way that the submissive and basically the downstream, or as Brett said it, predator and prey of the way that the circle works, because I chose green, I do not at this point in the game have the red rune, which allows you to restore your health. And by the time, because I don't have that through Karim's story, I've been using the medallion or whatever it is, the scarab thing, throughout the whole level. So I was out of charges then. And so I basically got to this almost, no point of no return, I'm starting the whole game over situation, because I couldn't finish that battle with a quarter health, no way to heal myself, and no insanity. I could restore my insanity. So what I ended up having to do, and this is my point where I won't be able to, it's dawning on me now, I won't be able to play the whole game fully insane, because there's just going to be some battles, I think, where if I have no insanity, then it hits my health too hard, and I'll just die. So I had to use the restore to fill up my insanity to go into that battle. There was some Dark Souls feeling moments where I was just like the perfect run. I used the torches, and we talked about in pre-show how we even have different enemies based on who we chose. And then ultimately I realized that I'm never going to get the rune that I need. So I ended up having to go backtrack, go back to one of the trapper rooms, intentionally get trapped, and then go and replenish my health there. And then I eventually just took enough hits. I hit him more than he hit me, and I finished it. But it took me about an hour to go through that whole process. And I should have thought of the trapper thing earlier for sure. And most of this is my fault based on the way I'm playing and not having enough saves at certain places, using my resources too much. But a lot of this is based on the choice that I made and what you have at your disposal at that time. So the reason I wanted to call it out is, from a balancing perspective, they will put players who choose the green rune, which is the only time this would happen. They're putting that player, unbeknownst to that player, into a heavier resource, under-resourced balanced situation. And I didn't know that. Otherwise, I would have saved my healing scarab thing. I would have saved that. So that's my story.
Yeah, and that's pretty rough, because I had a rough time of that as it was, like without the specific balancing issues that having selected green means.
Terrible room I didn't.
Yeah, I restarted as blue because last time we discovered I had somehow, despite having the text in front of me, nonetheless chosen the same color as you. Right. So I started over, and blazing through the first 3 levels didn't take very long, although I kept dying as the old Phoenician dancer girl, the young Phoenician dancer girl, Elia or whatever her name is. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, it was bizarre, because I ran through it the first time I had no trouble. I don't think I died at all the first time I played it. And now playing it again, I was suddenly running into all kinds of troubles. Anyway.
Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, with the traps, but also I had forgotten that you have to swap the necklaces, and I just was skipping that step, and so I didn't have any healing. I'm like, why don't I have any healing? And thankfully I was streaming it, and somebody said, because you didn't switch the necklaces, dummy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was
still hard.
That one room is a real struggle, and as the blue, having the blue enemies, I have the problem where they explode, right. And they like chain explode. So if you don't get to their heads really quick, because if you chop off their heads, they can't explode because they don't shout. I'm not sure how that really works. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that's very well physically motivated, but okay. But yeah, I just got faster at it. I just got better at it, I guess.
Right.
You can retreat and heal. You can use the necklace if you have necklace charges left. But yeah, it was nonetheless. I saw that one room probably six times, maybe 10 times. I played it a bunch.
So you did have the red rune, right? So you could restore your health if you needed to.
I could restore my health if I needed to. Though I had still charges left in the necklace, which is faster.
Okay, yeah.
So it actually was better to use the necklace, as it turned out, because then I could, if I had to recharge the weapon, if I had to re-enchant the weapon, I could do that as well.
But at the very least, going into the battle, you were probably full health, or you were.
I was close, yeah.
So it's one of those dreaded feelings in the pit of your stomach where that definitely happens more in the old days than these days, but where you feel like you've just gotten yourself into a corner, and just, it's not, we talk about a bug sometimes, and it's not an a bug necessarily, but it's close because, sometimes you get yourself into that corner and you do literally have to start the game over to progress.
But you're using this 3 save system that I'm hearing about, and what is that? Are you just cycling through 3 saves?
Yeah, I'm just cycling through 3 states, but there's no auto saves, and so I'm using them frequently. So by the time I'd gotten to that, my 3 saves weren't far enough back to really do me any good.
Gotcha.
Like, they weren't far enough back to get me my scarab stuff back. I literally would have had to have started over.
I go a different way. I have 2 saves. I have 1 save, which is Alex.
Yeah.
Before a chapter begins, and the other save is just as I go.
Yeah, I should probably do that. I should, or at least have one for just each. I should.
If I had to restart, I would be able to go back to this. Yeah, if you had 2 that were alternating, and then there you go.
In retrospect, I probably would have. I would have liked to have had a save for each chapter, to be honest, if there's enough of them, save slots. But
there probably are. Yeah,
but
pro strat, man. Gotta have that Alex save.
Yeah, no, it's good. That's a good tip. I'm also, playing like I usually do for the podcast. I'm kind of just playing nonchalantly too. I'm not trying to overly game anything. So I kind of I wasn't frugal with my scarab heals. I was just using them because you meet other big guys along the way.
Sure, yeah.
I needed them. So, and I don't have that extra resource. So it's interesting, we're going to probably talk constantly through each episode about how the choice that we made at the beginning, and we talked about it last episode, where it's one of those proverbial, I make a choice and have no idea what the choice means problems. It's going to come back time and time again, I'm sure. Not even just in the narrative, which is clearly the case, but now this gameplay moment happened where, and hopefully I have the red rune from Maximilian's chapter, so I should be good now, but who knows?
Yeah, we'll see how it goes for you. I'm curious. I'm very curious because that was almost my playthrough. But it's also, I think we've talked about this with other games, usually older games than this, and maybe this hadn't quite yet been a shift. But there was the sense of, if the player's doing that, that's just their choice. I think we talked about it with Thief. That's just their choice to do that. They'll just have to figure out to do something else, right? And the players not doing the finishing moves. We told them to do the finishing moves, So I feel like there's a certain aspect of, at this time, the expectation that when they told you, oh, you do this to regain this thing, then you'll do that, right? Because meters going down is bad. So
well, and in fact, it did force me to start doing that. I had to start doing the finishers for a while, and I opted to a different strategy, which I won't get into the details. But so one series of attempts, I was using the finishing moves because I needed something. Because when that big guy comes in, if I had empty, insanity, then I basically die because he
just shows up and that's it. I can't take any more.
Yeah, but and it's fair on the finishing moves. The thing that frustrates me though is it's clear that they give you these medallions with healing on them on purpose because you don't yet have that ability, and I didn't know that, so the finishing moves are one thing that I'm choosing not to do, but there's also things that are just outside of my control, and it's really just because I chose green. The other irony of my playthrough style with this insanity stuff is I chose green, so therefore the thing I can do the best is utilize and manipulate insanity, which I'm not using. So
right.
Recovering insanity is not a spell I'm using. Because I don't want it to be full. Anyway.
But I think you get to control them a little bit as well. You basically turn the tides on them with insanity, I believe.
Yeah, I think there's other spells, but I'm talking about the recover one specifically.
Right.
Yeah, but I think there's other stuff I can do with it that's pretty fun. And in fact, the big green guy, which you didn't have, but you maybe have met, when you get hit by his green electrical power, it stuns and confuses you for a second. You lose control of your character.
Oh, wow.
So that made it even worse. So I couldn't, I had to stay close to him so he wouldn't use his ranged attack, which was that lightning effect. So I wouldn't, lose control of my character. But then if I'm close to him, he's going to swipe at me. So it was just the whole thing.
Wow, that is brutal.
Yeah, it's funny.
Brutal.
We've talked about this too long, but
yeah, no. Well, let's move on to the stories themselves, because we talked a little bit about the structure without sort of delving into the three characters in addition to Alex we got to play as this time, which is another development oddity. Like, this is a game where there's a lot of extra development, although I guess there's a lot of enemy reuse, though there's a much wider selection of enemies already than I remembered.
Also the color, different colored versions too, which is interesting.
Well, I mean, that's there's interesting behavior there, although I bet all of that is fairly simple under the hood. Like some numbers, take from this models. Instead of that. Are the models all different?
Well, I'm sure the rigs, the skeletons and the rigs and the animations, they share, but like the blue guys don't look like mine. I've met them.
That's true. They do have different textures. They're blue and they have different textures. Yeah, for the zombies, for example. That's true. No, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not a whole different thing, but you're right. It's different enough. I'd kind of forgotten. That the red ones were like, oh, I've just had my skin removed, versus the green ones and the blue ones are a little different. Yeah, that's true. Because I've mostly now been seeing more blue ones recently. Yeah, and I'd kind of forgotten that distinction. But yeah, I mean, they're putting this divergence of having to develop a lot of different sorts of things into the player characters' stories through this structure. You're also getting to play all these different characters who have different weapons and therefore different attack animations. Like there's a lot to it. I have to imagine they were really pushing at what could be fit on one of these little mini discs, really. Yeah.
And statistics too, right? Some of them run more slowly than others.
Right.
Stamina seems to be different sometimes. I think even the amount of magic, like for instance, how much magic you have in your magic resource meter is different per character. Maybe health too. I
could believe that with poor Maximilian. He looks like he has not been getting a lot of exercise.
No,
whereas Karim, on the other hand, hot stuff. Yeah. But let's start with Anthony. One of the things with the stories that I definitely want to touch on is how they managed to cover the gamut of ways protagonists in a Lovecraftian story can meet their end.
Right.
And we start with Anthony, and this was one I had forgotten, as well as the stream was like, oh, that's right. Poor Anthony gets a curse right off the bat, which is like prematurely aging him, I guess. Like he's just getting worse and worse, which is another thing. Of course, they have to layer these textures mostly on his face, I guess. But yeah, poor Anthony is this. I want to say a novice, but maybe a messenger or something. Mm-hmm. And he's got to get a message to the bishop who's supposedly meeting with Charlemagne. Mm-hmm. And we already know from a cutscene before this that they want to kill Charlemagne, that Pious Augustus and whoever his old god is that he's talking to need to murder Charlemagne. And so you have that setup going into this story with Anthony. So there's a sense of urgency built in. And then you're playing this poor young person. It's like a Joan of Arc story in a sense, right? Who's a person who's a little out of their depth, dressed pretty much the same as Joan of Arc, at least in the silent film Passion of Joan of Arc. Highly recommended. Yeah, it's a really good one. Yeah, it's worth seeing. Great, some great stuff in that. Anyway. But yeah, maybe you want to take it from there in terms of what's going on with poor Anthony.
Well, I mean, he basically realizes that there's some plot / conspiracy against Charlemagne and needs to go find him before they get to him. And of course, as usual, there's a key that he needs that involves an elaborate series of steps that he has to go through in the monastery to get to that key. But one interesting part of the structure, which happens with each of these stories, is there's a moment early in the chapter where they are transported to this room where they all acquire the Tome of Eternal Darkness. Mm-hmm. And so you see statues on this walkway as you walk down, as each of these characters, toward the book of the previous chapters, which I think is cool. Of course, there's screaming faces in the floor, and this skeletal hand opens up and gives you the book. Of course, all of them choose to pick the book up. Of course, they have to. So Anthony does, and he's, throughout the course of his story, like every few rooms or whatever, he's, as Brett said, he's sort of shot by this curse and in agony, and then sort of, I don't know if he's growing older or turning into a zombie or what. But the interesting thing about his story, I thought, is that they keep coming back to his weakness being faith. I feel like they mention faith a lot, and then at the end, the bad bishop or monk person says, you let your faith blind you, or something like that. And I feel like each of the stories so far has had some, I don't want to say it's like one of the 7 deadly sins, but it's sort of in that ilk where Karim has love sort of blinds him in a way, and then Anthony is faith, and Maximilian maybe is knowledge. I don't know what Maximilian's is, but that ends up having to do with their death, essentially.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you picked up on that, because I didn't. So I'm really happy to hear you talk about that, because you're definitely right. Something about these characters, they have some fatal flaw, which is going to lead to their downfall. Right. And having faith in the Christian God, I guess, is one of them. For Anthony, right? I mean, he doesn't believe in the real gods, right? The ones that actually are impacting our plane or whatever.
Right. And he thinks he can do something about it or something, right? And finally moves forward. I guess with Ellie, I remember a scene in the beginning of her story where she sort of like wants more out of life and kind of like, this is boring.
Right. She wants to have an adventure, like in her storybooks. Yeah.
Right. And so it's almost,
and her storybook is the Tome of Eternal Darkness.
Right. That's I don't know how that happened to her, but I don't know what parent gave her that book, but with her, it's almost like curiosity killed the cat kind of thing. And so I don't know if that'll continue to be the case, but I felt like there was a bit of a theme there. So with Anthony, it was very faith-based. And, but with let's see, if I can remember, with Anthony, you get your first circle of power, and you get the first couple. They start introducing you to magic, basically.
Right.
Get a couple of the runes, and
you have to learn to repair the cups so that they can hold the vile fluid and therefore become heavy enough to depress a plate on a floor to open a door.
Yeah.
So, and he actually klutzily breaks one of the glasses himself. So it's clear. It makes it clear that, oh, you're going to have to deal with this because you had this thing that was in fine shape until you picked it up. So I thought that was a good touch too. They sort of, it's interesting because they basically show you the objects in all the different states, because you find the third cup is whole and it has the fluid in it.
Yeah.
So they just
a puzzle. I mean,
yeah, it's really neatly done. It sort of shows you, it sort of instructs you as to what's going on there. Like, oh, you did this thing and this happened to it. It was fine before. You must be able to get it to this other thing, right? Because you have one of those too. It's a very good puzzle design for an adventure game. Yeah, I like that a lot.
I've been impressed. I mean, as is usually the case for puzzles in adventure games, you're really just finding different ways to hide a lock and key situation. And they've done a really good job at blending that in with, as we talked about earlier in the episode, teaching you something about usually the magic system or something like that. Or in this case, they actually introduced the mixing interface in the inventory, which is, similar to Resident Evil or whatever. So there's an additional tool there. But yeah, I've been impressed. They've smoke and mirrored their way through a lot of locks and keys, and they're always related instead of. I feel like in Resident Evil's case, often it's pretty arbitrary. It's like this gem,
very abstract. Yeah. Oh, you got to put this thing in the eye of the thing on the gravestone or whatever. Yeah.
For no reason. The other small story point that I loved in Anthony's story was the thing that kind of triggers everything to happen in his chapter is he opens the coffin of this monk that was recently dead. Right. They say something about the monk had fallen off of a balcony or something, but people were skeptical on whether that's actually how he died. And you open this casket up and his chest is burst open and stuff. And so there's this foreshadowing to the bone thieves. Is that what we figured out they were called, bone thieves?
So the bone thieves. Yeah.
So there's a little bit of foreshadowing to this enemy you haven't met yet, but later in this chapter has a cool sort of introduction, I believe, with inside another monk, was it? Or I forget where it was exactly, but
it was inside another monk. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's they have some nice little breadcrumbs here and there that kind of are just setting up the world in various ways. But yeah, he ultimately finds Charlemagne, who is already taken out. How did Charlemagne die in real life? Was there? Charlemagne's always mentioned in a lot of the older conspiracy stuff.
Yeah, that's because he's a historical figure, who looms large. I'm not actually sure how Charlemagne actually died, but I suspect it was not at the hands of old god cultists. I'm guessing he lived to the ripe old age of, let's see, what is that? 58 and 14, so 72, quite old.
Okay, yeah, but you never know. You don't know how exactly he died. He might have died of old age, but Well,
I'm going to tell you, because here we are. He died January 28th, the seventh day from the time he took to his bed at 9:00 in the morning. So it sounds like he died of illness.
Yeah. Interesting. Illness.
47th year of his reign. Yeah, illness.
Sure.
He fell ill with pleurisy, and he had a deep depression, and then he took to his bed and then just died.
Or did
so there you go. I've been to a town that had his throne in it. Where was that? Somewhere in Spain. Anyway,
remains.
I don't know if it was his remains, but there was definitely like a throne, or there's something you could go see that had something to do with Charlemagne. Anyway.
Well, I love, as I probably said before on the cast, I love retconning historical events into conspiracy theory events. You'd think I would love the Assassin's Creed series more than I do because of that. But So, that I'm just eating that stuff up,
Yeah.
and there's only more coming, as well. So, but what about Karim's story? He comes up next. Why don't you start walking us through that?
Yeah. So Karim is basically been sent by his lover, or something, fiance maybe, to basically get her riches. So he's going to go hunt in these old ruins to see if he can find her what she seeks, right? And he ends up, of course, coming into this shrine that is the same place that Pious Augustus had been zapped into. So he finds another entrance, basically. But you come back into some of the spaces Pious Augustus had gone to. In particular, that room where you have the fight that is the longest fight we've had thus far. That's the room, I think, where Augustus makes his choice, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, you're right. I didn't put two and two together on that. It was familiar, but I was like, oh, this just looks like another room with three things in it. But it was. No, you're right. And in fact, the hovering for you probably was a different one, but one of the artifacts is probably hovering, right? That Augustus saw as well. For me, it was the blue one.
Oh, interesting. I didn't actually notice that.
At the end, like when she comes in.
You're right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When she comes in. Okay, yeah. So he fights his way through this temple. He encounters the book in that way that you mentioned. We get to walk down that walkway and see Anthony's statue. So we know at some point in the future, we're going to do it again. We're going to see two statues. But that's a great way to call back, to what you've done already. And it's pretty low cost, really. It's just an asset that you probably can make from an asset you have. And then basically the story ends with him learning that his lover has, or fiance or whatever she is, actually, it seems like time has jumped or something, but she's become a ghost.
I feel like she comes in and says that she was killed or cursed by a jealous mistress of somebody that she basically lied to him.
She took a lover, and then or something, and he had a mistress who cursed her. This other man, right. And Karim on the one hand is like, I can't believe you betrayed me, but I guess he still feels something for her ghost.
I don't know why he does what he does, but she also awkwardly mentions, well, not awkwardly, but interestingly enough, she mentions that they now in her ghost form, and then if he were to join her, they need to protect the artifacts or something. And he's like, okay, I guess I'll do that, and join her eternally, for all eternity. So, yeah, I mean, there's some holes here and there, and such. It's not perfect, but it's admirable that they give enough of a motivation for each of these characters to think, that they have. And you mentioned voice acting. I think that, for the time, for the most part, most of the voice actors do a fairly good job at kind of giving you some meat there to the bone. So, and I will say too that it there's also a sort of sense, and in particular, even the way that things are shot and then frozen, there's sort of like a creep show style ending, right? What is it? EC Comics or whatever it was. I can't remember what the name of the company was, but one of these companies that made comics that ended up being, like Amazing Stories and stuff like that.
Like in Amazing Stories, right? Or I was thinking specifically of the horror comics of the 50s before the code, where they were pretty gory, but there was always this thing where there was a final frame where the twist ending is revealed, right? And that's the last thing, and you see the person responding to the horror of that moment or whatever, or dying or what, something appropriate happening. And it was memorialized in Creepshow, which is why I refer to that. And it's that formula as well. So they are it feels like they're also drawing on that history, even though they're telling more Lovecraftian tales. I guess some of those stories had that element, but they tended to be more like, zombies and things like that. They were pretty straightforward horror stories in most cases, but there was usually some twist at the end, like in the Creepshow film, or the comic written by Stephen King that sort of preceded it. Or actually, I'm not sure what order that happened in. I guess it was the movie first. But yeah, it has those moments where it's like, we freeze, we see how it ends and somebody says something or whatever. I love how Karim's eyes, I mean, it's pretty expressive for a character of the generation. Where you get to see the full reaction of his face as he has this kiss that is going to seal his fate. So there's a lot going on in that I like, and it really brings in a lot of horror stuff kind of all at once. So it's good, especially with the theming that you mentioned. So it even further kind of enriches my enjoyment of these little stories.
Well, and I totally missed that Karim was going back to the place where Pious was. I guess, I don't know how I missed that. It seems
well. The angles are not good to read it that way. Like, I mean, you're at a very high angle to see that room, and unless, I mean, I had to flee the blue things that were going to explode, and that's what led me all the way back down there. I might not have noticed that otherwise. So there actually just was some happenstance, I think, for me that led to me recognizing that. So yeah, it's not, I don't think it's a natural conclusion you draw. And I think that's really good asset reuse as well, right? They found a way to reuse this, at least in that one room. There might be some other stuff that's similar, but it's not directly the same.
Well, and yeah, I mean, the connecting Pious, right, and kind of having him return time and time again, and having a character return to where he was, that's to your point about sort of like adding to the enjoyment of some of there's just a lot of interconnectedness happening that I didn't remember from the first, and as we'll get into the next.
And Maximilian looks like Augustus as well. I don't know if you noticed that. I think it might be the same face asset.
Really? Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. That's even cooler. I mean, if that's the case, I mean, and as another small note, like with Augustus, that I forgot to mention earlier, his statue is broken in half, so you don't see the top of it. So I thought that was an interesting kind of commentary, and in the walkway, where
right, where Anthony's statue shows up and everything.
He's the one that the one statue of all of those. He's the one that has sort of is not betrayed, but sort of started the family on this bad path, in a way. But then we go to Maximilian's, which, as we talked about a little bit with the structure, the coolest thing for me in that chapter is that you're returning to a different era, different arid version of the mansion. So you get to see, and in fact, I think in his voiceover narration, he talks about inheriting the mansion the same way as Alex's grandfather did. And then there's some mysterious stuff going on with the servants or what have you. Some good spookiness happening there. And again, you see NPCs, which we haven't seen yet, really. That's only like the second time I think you see real NPCs doing much. I guess there's a couple here and there in some of the other chapters. Yeah,
there's the one you talk to in the dancing, Elias's chapter, who will repair your sword.
Yeah, you can save them and they'll give you something for it. I haven't tried killing them yet, but you can target them like you can enemies. So I don't know what happens if that. But yeah, the cool thing about Maximilian's is you start, first of all, in Alex's chapter in between interstitial area. Did you see the ghost of Maximilian going through that door? Did you catch that when you wander around, or do you wander around?
I didn't. I don't think. I mean, I did wander around quite a bit, but I don't specifically remember that.
So maybe I wrote that for you. But
that's fine.
There's that hallway where the servants' quarters are locked. In Maximilian.
Yes. Yeah, in Maximilian's time. Mm-hmm.
In Alex's time, that door is wallpapered over or whatever. So it's not there, but you can see that there's there was a door there. So there's some.
Oh, I did see that ghost. Yes. Okay, I remember now.
In the hallway, and then Maximilian's ghost walks through the wall.
Right.
in that room.
I guess I didn't connect that was Maximilian, but yes. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, that's, again, it's just this mansion is a character in that sense, right? So the mythology behind it. And then the coolest thing, which is, in my opinion, not just a callback to Lovecraft, and forgetting which story, I think there's one where below the house is one of the cities.
Yes. Yeah.
But they do that in Alone in the Dark as well. If you recall, I don't know if you ever played the original, but
I did.
In below the house in Alone in the Dark is the the bad stuff that you discover, and the same thing happens in Dark Corners of the Earth as well.
Right, of course.
Which is a great game. We'll talk about someday. Probably not, but I would like to talk about it.
It was the Nameless City.
The Nameless City, yeah. Oh, that was the story. Yeah. So, it's great fodder for this story where you're returning back to the mansion, and you have this character who has a scientific background because he can autopsy. I don't remember if he's a doctor or a scientist or what, but he can autopsy the enemies and then get information about them in a bit of a journal sense. Sometimes he gives you a hint about how to fight them, but usually it's not really that meaningful. And then he starts finding these letters who I don't actually know. The letters are from another Roivas, but I don't know who that is.
Yeah, it's from Aaron Roivas.
Yeah, but who is that? His father?
I think it's his uncle.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I like about the letters from Aaron Roivas is how the name keeps getting shorter. So the first time it's Aaron Roivas, then it's A Roivas, and then it's AR in the third letter. It's great. Like I'm getting so sapped of energy, I can't even write my whole name anymore.
Yeah. And he, of course, he tells you not to go down into the basement, and you do. And there's some cool little moments of emptying the well down there to find the ladder that leads to the Nameless City, and that coming out on that walk or that balcony and seeing the sort of skybox painting of the Nameless City below, super spooky, and just great cosmic horror fodder for that kind of stuff. And then he eventually goes insane, and says he wants to let the world know what's happening.
Well, I'm not sure it's that he is actually insane. I think it's that people believe him to be insane.
Fair enough.
Right. Which is even more horrifying, to be honest. Like if I was going to be imprisoned in a institution of some kind, particularly at that time, I'd rather just be insane.
Right. Yeah, he's in fact telling the truth. They put him in this asylum for it. Yeah. So,
but it's a great, another type of ending. That the horror is, that his, like you said, that his knowledge leads to his undoing. He knows something now, and that's what turns the tables on him. Mm-hmm. Like Karim loved something, and that turned the tables on him. And even the cinematography for those ending sequences are surprisingly good for the time, I'd say too. As in Maximilian specifically, a little detail that's silly, super silly to call out, but I'm going to call it out. There's the camera shot of him in the cell. It's low near the ground at the beginning, and a rat comes over and takes his wig and runs off with it. And then you pan up and you see that he doesn't have his wig on, and he's in the straitjacket and stuff. But it's just little things like that, where they've really got the pulp feel down with this thing, and it fits right into the genre that it's trying to achieve. So and and like I said with Karim, it's very expressive, much more expressive than I think of faces being at the time in games. So they really spent their budget appropriately for the models, even though they can't be super high poly, and probably there are. Well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like there would be different face models, but maybe there are for these shots. But there's also the tie-in with Pious, so because it is, I believe it's the same face broadly.
That's something else, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. But he's a portly gentleman, He looks like a guy who has gout. He's he kind of walks a little slowly. His combat isn't super fast. He has pistols, which is kind of cool, although I didn't end up using them. I found the saber more effective. Yeah, it's good. He doesn't have a ton of combat, although he does have some of his servants turn on him, which is also good when it happens because you're not expecting it. Yeah, lots of good stuff. Oh, and the other thing is that there's another entrance into the secret library, the real library, through the fireplace.
That was cool.
That was really also cool. a great touch. So yeah,
well, and then when you go down into the study, the secret study or whatever that is, the entrance that Alex uses is not there, of course.
Right, because they haven't added that wing on or whatever.
There, yeah, and then if you pay attention, when you go into her version of that, you see aspects in Maximilian's time, like where he got one of the flintlock pistols off the wall. That is like that area is destroyed where. So it's like you see the little clues of the two different times.
Right. Yeah.
I don't remember. I assume we're going to go to another version of the mansion with her grandfather. Maybe it's the same one, but I hope we get to see like a third. I don't remember if we do a third.
I'm fairly certain we do. Yeah, I'm fairly certain we do, and I look forward to it as well.
One quick thing I wanted to mention for Maximilian's section, just to sort of come back around to the 3 colored runes. The last of the 3 runes that each of us got is in Maximilian's section. And it was an interesting moment for me. I assume it's the same for you. I came through a door and then everything went sepia tone. And then it looks like an insanity effect moment where it's just going to restart itself, where it's like, oh, you died. And then, oh, I'm insane. I never entered that room after all. And it just resets. But in my case, it's the world goes sepia. I walk down into the stairway into the sort of foyer area, and there's a big enemy there who has the final rune, the red rune that I didn't have inside of him. And then I killed that one, got the rune, so I had the 3rd rune, and then it sort of resets like it was an insanity effect, but I kept the rune.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you got the 3rd one too?
I'm pretty sure that's how I got it as well. For me, it would have been the green rune.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a weird combat there with a rune monster. The runes are in different monsters. Well, sometimes they're in that really big one, but I felt like that one was different.
Yeah, I don't know if there must be a rule set there that I haven't picked up on, but so yeah, I just wanted to make note of that the way that because they sort of have, because they've made 3 versions of this game, they have a problem now for that last rune because it depends on which one, so they had to kind of create this one-off moment to make sure everyone got the runes they needed. Do you know what I mean?
Right, yeah. And
I thought it was an insanity moment at first, but then it turns out it was actually critical path. So very, very odd little kind of, I don't want to say Band-Aid, but it was,
Yeah, it's sort of akin to, having this story Band-Aid of teleporting these characters to this weird hallway somewhere where they get the book, right? It's sort of a similar Band-Aid in that way. It's just like, well, we can do these things, right? We can't, you can't do it all the time. And even with that walkway, I think putting the statues out there is like a signature of saying, okay, yeah, we're going to keep coming back to this. So you actually anticipate it a little bit, but you can't do that all the time. So they're actually using lots of different sorts of tricks to have these kind of reused moments that basically are to plaster over story problems. Why it doesn't make any sense how Anthony would come by this book. Oh, okay. Or Karim, oh, okay, we'll have him teleport to this other place and get it. Yeah. That makes no sense at all. But when you add this element of there's these statues and stuff, it makes it okay. It makes it like, oh, this was planned, right? It's because, there's 4 more spots I've got to fill, right? It just, I don't know. It's very, we say often that games are smoke and mirrors, and this is like huge amount of smoke.
Yeah. They're just embracing it fully.
Yeah.
And not apologizing for it. Yeah.
That's right. They're like showing you how they're doing the magic trick.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in that pulp kind of tone, and like you said, that creep show kind of tone, which a lot of his stories end in a similar sort of shocking way as well.
Right.
They're all short stories, right? So the format's very similar. and that tone fits this sort of like, yeah, I can have a hallucination where I get this rune and it doesn't matter because it fits. Yeah,
it's the pattern of the pulps, right, which is sort of almost a holdover from the serials, which would have been the late 19th century, Dickens, for example, probably the best known example, where the stories always ended on this high note of drama. And in this case of the serials, it was because you were going to get the next installment of the story. That story structure sort of lasted into the short story era, which really propelled the pulps. So there's some this sort of natural connection there. I mean, it's very true of other stuff of the era, like sword and sorcery pulps, like Ron Howard, who was a friend of Lovecraft's, actually. Robert Howard, rather, not Ron Howard. Ron Howard is not that old.
He's one of the old
Robert Howard, who wrote the Conan stories. They're very similar in that way. Right. There's that kind of moment of satisfaction of Conan at the end, now that he's thwarted the latest wizard and made off with the latest jewel or what have you. There's a similar kind of moment always in those stories, which is kind of a high note end. Not a scare moment, but definitely a repeated trope of how those stories end. So you see that a lot in all the pulps. In many of the pulps anyway.
Yeah. They know their stuff, it seems like.
They do. They clearly did a lot of reading. So speaking of reading, maybe we should turn to reading a little bit of feedback.
All right.
You see what I did there?
Well done.
And we'll get to, we have a review and a couple of emails this time. The emails are long, so we'll see. Maybe we'll just do one because we won't have a ton for next week. So yeah, let's do the review first, and then we'll do the one email that I'll read, and then call it a night.
Oh, the review I have?
Yes, you have the review.
Okay. Title, Game Designer Knowledge from H. Chris 7. There's an HK in there. I wonder if that's a reference.
Oh, interesting. I had not caught that.
Recently,
I'm not a geek.
Aren't you? Recently got into World of Warcraft, and it's been great hearing these two talk about the game that started WoW and everything surrounding its initial launch. Great podcast, GG. I assume he's talking about our Warcraft series.
Yes, that's what I figured.
I was like, wait, we haven't played World of Warcraft yet.
That Warcraft is going back a ways, but I thought that was pretty funny.
Thanks, HK.
H. Chris. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was calling you a geek after I had a long, discursion there about to the works of Robert Howard. So
yeah, right, and how series led to pulp, and a geek of a different kind.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah, we love to have those reviews through the sort of iOS podcast infrastructure. That's where I am subscribed to them all. So we love to have them, and it helps us reach new listeners. So if you haven't in the past written a review, we would love to have it from you. And of course, as I say every time we read a review, if you write a singing review, I will sing it. Tim will sit through it. And you just have to tell me what song it is, because I don't always know.
I applaud your persistence.
I've committed to the bit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I have an email here from, I'm going to check and make sure he doesn't give a different name at the end. Yes, from Derek. It says the subject is Doom knockoffs and fighting game controllers. This was sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. Says, hey guys, wanted to bring a couple things that came to mind in this last Doom episode. Long email, sorry, I'm sure you can deal with it. Yes, I'll deal with it by reading it all. I thought Brett had mentioned you guys would be discussing some of the Doom clones and knockoffs in this episode, but it wasn't brought up again. True, forgot. One notable and silly knockoff is Chex Quest. If you haven't heard of it, it's truly absurd. In 1996, you could find this game packaged in boxes of Chex cereal. It was a total conversion based on the Ultimate Doom engine that had our hero, the Chex Warrior, defending his home planet from the invading Fleamoids. Fleamoids? Fleamoids, I don't know. It was a solid game, not surprising, since it was essentially just a reskin of Doom that developed a bit of a cult following over the years, resulting in the release of Chex Quest 2 in 1997 and Chex Quest 3 in 2008. He gives a video link that I will put in the show notes. Your other discussion on controllers, that is, everyone has a controller, everyone has a mouse and keyboard, and the apparent leveling of the playing field got me thinking. I'm an avid watcher of competitive fighting games, and yes, your constant misuse of the term combos did strike a nerve.
I have something to say about that later, but keep going.
Oh, okay. Put a pin in that. And a player's choice of controller is an often debated aspect of the genre. Many fighting games use a 6-button layout, 3 punches and 3 kicks for Street Fighter, for example, which does not lend itself well to standard controllers, which only have 4 face buttons, forcing you to awkwardly use the triggers for some attacks. Or the Sega Genesis, where I think you had to press the start or select button or something like that to switch from punches to kicks or something like that way back in the day. But I digress. For many years, it seemed to be widely accepted that any true professional fighting game player would use an arcade-style controller with a joystick and all attack buttons on the controller face to emulate the arcade days of old. However, in recent years, we now have a number of younger players who did not grow up in the arcade days of yore and are doing extremely well using standard console controllers, or pad players, as they are often called. There's even one player, Luffy from France, who uses an original PS1 controller with a converter to allow it to connect to a PS4. The button action must have been particularly good on the PS1 controller, if that's what he's doing. Anyway, he continues, there is a specific controller type called a hitbox, which is a large lap-style controller, but has 4 discrete buttons for directional inputs rather than a joystick. Proponents of the hitbox would argue that this is an objectively better controller, despite an initial awkward learning curve, because your directional inputs are more precise since they are specific input buttons rather than the looser analog-feeling joystick. This led to some controversy when it was discovered in certain games, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, for example, where you could press both the left and right directions simultaneously and block in both directions, which is not possible on a standard joystick or D-pad. This is a big deal, as many of those games rely on mix-ups to make your opponent guess on whether they have to block left or right. The issue has since been patched out, either by firmware updates or game patches, apparently. There's another link there. My point here is that I think it's very interesting how tournament organizers of fighting games are generally pretty loose in allowing players to use whatever crazy controller they want to use and do not standardize, which I don't think is something you see to any degree in other genres at the competitive level. I mean, just to aside on that, I don't watch a lot of competitive stuff, but I assume that mice are a differentiator. Like, there are mice for gamers, right, with high click rates and things like that. And I assume some of these people are supported by are sponsored rather by peripheral.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good point. I don't know of the same. Yeah, you could put mice in a very similar category that he's putting sticks. As far as like, there are a lot of varieties. Way that some of them are weighted, the number of buttons they have, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I don't believe there's that many regulations put on those. So yeah, there's a little bit more flexible, as he said, with the mice specifically. I think he's largely bringing up the crossplay sort of debate, right? Which I agree with him generally. I think that there's growing pains, especially with shooters right now with crossplay, and it's obviously a hot topic for anything that I've worked on for a while. But I believe COD is going crossplay, and they're going to matchmake based on what controller you're using to avoid. Oh,
interesting.
Yeah. So to avoid some of the sort of, pointing fingers that people will inevitably, say it's like, oh, they were playing with the mouse and keyboard, that's why they won, or whatever. So
right.
They're going to initially. The truth of the matter is, though, I think over time, and it's probably not even going to be that long, the same thing that he's talking about with the fighting game community is going to happen with shooters too. I think there's the initial thing that the companies are defending against. Oh, don't worry, it'll be balanced. Mouse and keyboard players will be playing with, because you can use mouse and keyboard on, say, an Xbox One as well, right? So
right
now, so there's that worry. But I think over the next few years, no one's going to care. I think it's going to be like fighting games too. And I think just fighting games have been around with this issue for longer. And I think that ultimately it's just going to be like, hey, play. And if you play with what you want to play with, and there's going to be somebody on a controller who's going to beat that person with a mouse, and no one's going to care later. That's my opinion. It's just for now, it's a bit of a controversy, but I think it's hollow for what it's worth.
All right, he continues. There is also a Street Fighter player named Mike Brolylegs Begum, who uses a very interesting setup to play. He was born with several disabilities and is bound to an electric motorized bed. He uses his mouth and one hand to use a controller, and he also has to get creative with the button mapping of his controller. Street Fighter allows for a mapping of multiple attack buttons to a single input, i.e. you can make X do a light punch and a medium punch. The game will usually just default to one or the other when both are pressed simultaneously, but he maps the attacks to specific buttons in a way that allows him to use most of his available attacks with a minimal amount of buttons. The allowed creativity of button mapping on the controller is really the only way he could ever compete. He's a true inspiration, and his story is worth reading. And there's an ESPN link here, so I'll put that in there as well. Don't see those too many in emails to us, ESPN links, but it's a esports story I guess they covered.
Cool.
And then finally he says, for further reading, look into option selects to really blow your mind on how deep these fighting game players get into exploiting game mechanics. Short version is that you can do a specific set of inputs in the game that will have two or more different outcomes depending on what your opponent chooses to do in that moment. Do they block? Do they attack? Do they jump? A truly useful option select would be one that would give you different but all favorable outcomes in any of those scenarios. Great show. Keep it up. And play Chrono Trigger already. Derek from Spokane. Spokane, I guess. I have we'll have to talk about that off air. I have a plan for Chrono Trigger. So
you do? Wow.
Oh, I do.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so you wanted to talk about the combo thing. There's a lot of great stuff in here, and I will put all these links in the show notes.
Yeah, it's a wonderful email.
Interested, a lot of stuff, a lot of detail.
I'm wondering with that guy that's using the PS1 controller, I wonder if he's using the one that didn't before they had the analog sticks. Because, notoriously for fighting games, most people use D-pad, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just using that because he wants just the D-pad and the buttons or something. But anyway.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
My small thing, this occurred to me the other day because since this podcast controversy has begun, I've actually had a couple conversations and heard in a couple other instances other developers use combo in the same way that we have been using it. And so what I want to say to our audience is, I get it. You're right. Technically correct. I'll give you that. But you're going to have to live with it because we all do it.
Yeah. I'm fairly certain we had a combo manager or something like that in the Starfighter code. Like that's what the class was called. The C++ class was literally like C combo manager or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, one of the instances that I heard was a friend who's a developer who's working on like an action RPG Diablo kind of game, and they were using it there too. And sort of comboing different elemental effects together, right? Which is not like a fighting game. So anyway, it's here to stay. It's nothing you can do about it.
I mean, it's specialized language that's been. It's used in one community differently than another, right? And in our community, game developers, we use it one way. And I'm sure, right, obviously fighting game developers, I'm sure, use it in the way that the fighting game community uses it, because they communicate with them. But for us, we don't. We don't. Yeah, well, I don't even know. I don't know who came first. So yeah. We use it as just a shortcut for combination, right? It's a combination of buttons for us. And so we say combo. Because who wants to go to all the trouble of saying a 4-syllable word when a 2-syllable shortcut will do?
Yeah, it's a waste of time.
That's right. So, that's why I call you Tim Lon.
I'm lucky if you give me that much.
Yeah. You are. You should count yourself lucky, sir. Yeah. You want to tell us, I think you had a plan for how much we're playing next?
Yep. Oh, good one. I didn't pull it up, but it's the next 4. Now we're up to the 4 chapters. So I think we have 4 and then 3, right?
Okay. Yeah, this is going to be our longest section then. Or most chapters. Yeah.
Most chapters. Who knows what is in store for us.
Right. Yeah, I don't specifically remember. I mean, whenever I'm playing them, it's funny because it's all coming back. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Karim. I remember Karim. And what happens to him, and so that's been kind of fun to re-encounter because I had just totally. I mean, I played this game and I loved it, but a lot of the details. I mean, the insanity effects are what's stuck, I guess, more than anything else. It's like, oh yeah, that was the game with all the wacky effects, and this cosmic horror story, right? Is kind of the broad, 17-year remembrance of this game. That happens to me a lot, and that there's not necessarily a specific moment or particular bits of the story that really stick. In part because it is kind of such a Lovecraft mashup, and also my children were young. I probably wasn't sleeping tons.
It's very
we shipped a game this year, so a lot of factors. But no, it's definitely it's fun to re-encounter it. I hadn't thought of this one when we originally were talking about doing this podcast, but now doing a horror thing every year, I guess it gives us the chance to revisit that. So I've been happily. There's some details I do remember quite well,
but I think one thing that the podcast obviously forces us to do, or forces me to do at least, is I played differently. I think differently as I'm playing, right? So, which I wouldn't have done back then, even though I was in development. I probably was playing just for fun. So it's fun to pay attention differently, as we're playing.
And I'm, taking notes and things like that, which is, before I entered the industry, I would do, and sometimes in the industry I would do because I was playing a game specifically because I knew I wanted it to impact. It was something we were all playing in order to think about whatever we were doing next, Republic Commando or whatever. And that's less the case these days. I mean, there's a certain aspect of I have a hard time turning my developer brain off sometimes, and I sort of see what they're doing. We see through the matrix, as it were. And even, picking this one apart, of course, that's part of the fun, is like, oh yeah, look what they did. Right. Look at the cool choices they made that really reinforce what they're trying to get at. Which is just a fun way to experience a thing, especially the second time. The first time it's just, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to have my fun, and I'm not going to think about it too much. And, this time out, we get to really dig in. So
we need both. We need both. And
we do.
There's times when I intentionally, want to make sure I'm not taking notes because I want that. Yeah. Which you do plenty of that both ways.
Yep. For sure.
So the chapter that we will finish is chapter 9, A War to End All Wars. So when you finish that chapter, then that'll be the 4 that we need to play.
Oh, right. Because we started at 0. I'm like, wait a minute. Shouldn't we play 0?
Yeah, they call it.
That's right.
So,
yep.
So technically 9, but the numbers don't matter. I don't think they number them anyway. So
that's true. Yeah.
So A War to End All Wars. I will stop after finishing rather than playing the.
It's fine. You do you, man.
But yeah, don't start Legacy of Darkness, which is the next one. But yeah.
All right. Cool. All right. Well, you will be able to find me playing that on my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. I have been playing Alan Wake weeknights. This week I'm going to try to find some time to play some shorter stuff by Kitty Horror Show and somebody else whose name has just slipped away. Not somebody who's I've played a lot of their stuff before, so it's kind of gone. But look forward to that. I'm going to try to do my homework and get some of that stuff downloaded so I can slot that in and play that stuff too. It has been really a trip to play Alan Wake. It's actually quite an enjoyable.
I missed that one. Yeah, I didn't.
Story universe. I don't know. It's yeah.
Seems like a good, appropriate one to be playing right now, especially for us playing this game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's got sort of it's got some similar themes. Yeah, we mentioned that I think last time. So it's because of the writer and all of this stuff. There's definitely some impact of writing on the world, which is a big part of it. So that's been fun. If you want to come check that out on weeknights, I'm doing that. You can also find the podcast on the web at devgameclub.com, where I post all the show notes. And you can find us on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Yeah, I hope you all have fun playing game this week. And good night.
Good night.